Hello, good afternoon. Welcome. It's Thursday at 4 p.m. Therefore, it must be time for another teissTalk. Hello to all of you joining us. We are live here at Teiss every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. I'm Jeff White. I'm an author and investigative journalist. I'm your host for the Thursday sessions. My able colleague, Jenny Radcliffe, handles the Tuesday sessions. Everything is archived online on the teissTalk website, so you can catch up with it all there. But why would you want to? You're here live where the conversation actually happens. Apologies, it's been a bit fraught getting the old teissTalk wagon on the road today for me. I was a bit late. I was at another session and had to sprint home, hence I'm not wearing my jacket as I usually am. I've also arrived home to find the house hotter than the sun because the heating system in the flat where I live dates back, I think, to the 1970s. It has one of those, I don't know whether you have it, one of these big brown water immersion tank things, this huge tank thing that's covered in really crusty, very, very old polystyrene to keep it kind of, I don't know, warm or whatever. And whenever there's any kind of power cut or disturbance, the heating resets itself to maximum temperature for like 7 hours a day. So not only have I walked back in home quite out of breath and puffed, I've also walked into a house that is basically hotter than mercury. So apologies, I'm just sitting here sweating. But there you go. It's all going to get better from now. Oh, my internet connection crashed just before we came on air. So what could go wrong? Nothing. Welcome to all of you. Hello to our Teiss regulars. Great to have you with us. And hello, if you're a newbie here at teissTalk, we love seeing new faces. Do drop a message in the chat. The chat window is yours to do with as you wish, within reason and legal boundaries. We've also got the Q&A up there. So you've got a question on our topic, stick it in the Q&A. And our topic for this week is one which we sort of touched on a bit before, but not quite from this aspect. Security awareness. We're going to be talking about, can security awareness keep up with the attackers who, as we know, are evolving fairly fast. We've got a great panel going to be chatting to us about this. We've got Oz Alashay, who's CEO at SibSafe. We've also got Hema Perez-Cortez, who is Information Security Awareness Lead at Canon EMEA. Stephen Furnell, Professor of Cybersecurity at the University of Nottingham. All to hear from them in a bit. We're going to welcome our first guest first, who is Craig McEwen, who is Chief Information Security Officer, CISO at Anglo American. Craig, how are you doing?
Hey Jeff, really good. I feel a bit of sympathy for your sort of incoming gas bill if your heating's been cranked up.
I know. That's the other thing. I walked in and thought, how long has this been going on? How many hours have I been heating a completely empty house? Do you have, Craig, do you have what? I imagine you've got like a smart home, so it's all hooked up to the internet and you can control it with the flick of a switch.
I mean, yeah, I know that's not necessarily the best thing as a CISO, but yeah, we do have a smart home, so we can play about when we're out, turn lights on and off to usually to wind up the babysitters. So, turn the living room lights blood red when their kids are in bed and the babysitter's just sat there. I think that's, my wife hates that, but I think it's quite amusing.
Do you have to give an extra big tip at the end of the night to make up for that?
I do. If they look nervous on the Nest camera, we'll make sure we give them a bit of a tip.
What I really want, I promise we will get into the topic in a second, but what I really want is, Sonos, the music system that's in different rooms, and you can turn different rooms on and off and, different volume. I really want that for central heating. There should be a thing, maybe our august teissTalk audience knows about this, where you can turn one radiator on at some time and then have that warmer. And shouldn't there be that? Shouldn't that exist as a thing?
I think you can get the Wi-Fi controlled thermostat switches on your radiator. I think you've got to get in bed with particular brands. So I've not done it myself. I've got a few guys who have done it. And yeah, they can customize each radiator on their phone to do whatever they want to do with. We've not gone that far yet.
Okay. Well, Simon's getting involved in the chat, and I suspect the answer to this is going to be something like Google. I need to go down the Google or Amazon route. But anyway, if anyone's got any hints, sorry, I've just turned this into a sort of home improvement session. But there you go. Let's get on with the topic in hand. And before we start on this, Craig, there's a news article we wanted to look at, which actually, Oz, our guest later on, is part of this. So we're happy to take a look at this one. This is from CyberSafe, Oz's company, but also the National Cybersecurity Alliance. This is research from a week ago, which says, top headline on this, there are other things in the study, but more than 1/3 of tech users fell victim to phishing despite access to training geared towards identifying attacks. On first blush, Craig, when you read the headline, without going further into it, did this resonate? This ring bells, or what?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's very apt for Cybersecurity Month, of course, to talk about this type of thing. Um, we do a lot of simulations in phishing simulations in Anglo American. We do lots of training, and we still see time and time again, people falling victim. I think the one thing, just to pull out from the headline, is that word victim, quite a common thing in the security industry. We sort of look at humans, and I think it touches on it in the article quite far down. We look at people as our employees being the weakest link. So they're the ones that cause all our woes as security professionals. I think sometimes we forget that, a cyber crime is a crime. So when someone successfully phishes you to harvest your credentials or to deploy, anything onto a system, you've become a victim. And, if I was a police officer and turn up to your house and your house has been broken into, there'd be sympathy, there'd be an understanding that you'd emotionally be feeling quite troubled by the fact someone had broken into your house. We seem to not do that with cyber crime victims. So I like the fact that this headline refers to them as victims, because usually we refer to them as, well, lots of things, if anything but victims. So I think it's important to remember that these people are true victims.
Yeah, it's interesting that, just to go further into detail of this was 3,000 individuals across the United States, UK, and Canada. Technically advanced nations, we should say. I think the UK still counts as a technically advanced nation. It was where's the actual bit? Which is talking about users adaptation. So yeah, as I say, there was a stat in here which I'm desperately trying to find. About the numbers of people who fell victim to this. Here we go. So even though more than half, 58% of tech users had access to cybersecurity training or education, cited they were better at recognizing phishing messages and related attacks, 34% still fell victim to at least one type of cybercrime, which I thought was really interesting. It gets kind of the heart of something we'll go on to discuss in the session, which is that question of effectiveness. You can raise somebody's awareness, but do they change their behavior, as a result? So that's the interesting question, Craig, isn't it? Is it that they had the awareness training and didn't listen and made a mistake that they shouldn't have made, or they listened and they had all the lessons but still got caught out because it's really difficult to spot all of the problems?
Yeah, I mean, I think I certainly subscribe to the latter myself. So we have a program where if someone fails a phishing simulation or they suffer an actual attack, we give them bespoke training where we'll look at the email they received. We'll sort of pick it apart and sort of highlight the areas where we thought there's alarm bells should ring there. And we do this for two reasons. One, to give a bit of additional training. The other thing we do is we use it to identify what's going on, and the amount of users that say, I knew it didn't look right, I wasn't comfortable with it, but I clicked it anyway. And you think, well, okay, so that's a cultural thing. That's not a deficiency in your knowledge. You just told me you recognized that something wasn't quite right about this email. So why did you go from the I didn't quite feel this was okay to then follow the link, for example? So that to me says it's absolutely the sort of latter. So you've got to remember, cyber criminals, that's their job. It's a profession. They're going to do everything they can to try and exploit human weakness. So they're going to send emails late in the day when you're trying to, if you have some sort of OCD and you clear your inbox every night. I do that. I am less vigilant when I'm furiously trying to clear out my inbox before I finish up for the evening. So they'll do things like that. They'll send them at specific times where you're going to be less on guard. They'll use language and wording. It's a lot more sophisticated. I think the days of the classic, maybe Nigerian prince emails, that those don't really exist anymore. It is really well crafted emails that are designed to catch you out. So, our users, say that collectively, they're up against it. They're against a determined group of criminals who are desperately trying to find ways to exploit them. And the criminals are very good at it.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of the other stats I want to pick up from this was about the difference between millennials and Generation Z, which can never keep up with the definitions of what counts as which decade you have to be born in. But look, young people, 20% of millennials had their identity stolen at least once. 18% of Gen Z had their identity stolen at least once. Now that's different to baby boomers, which I don't think I'm quite part of, but maybe a few years ahead of me. 8%, only 8% had their identity stolen. which is really interesting. To double the number of young people, which we tend to think, young people tech savvy, it's the older people we've got to worry about. That completely turns on its head. And I wondered, Craig, does that affect when you hear stats like that? Do you do different things to with your different sectors of the workforce? If an Anglo-American or younger employee is getting a different training to older employees, for example, or should they be?
So we don't target age, although I do recognise that younger people they've grown up with it more, so maybe they're perhaps a little less wary of it. The older generations they recognise it as something that was new and came in their lifetime, and there may be a little bit more trepidation in engaging with it, which may sort of account for that. We do separate training within the business. We don't go down an age route; we go down job role route. So people who have privileged accounts receive different training. People who work in dev environments receive different training. So we do have different approaches for people with different roles, recognizing that, first and foremost, their level of access may be different. So we might want to protect them from that perspective, but also the type of targeting they may receive or the types of mistakes they could make are quite different as well. So we do tend to, funnily enough, though, we target our execs separately as well. And they're the hardest to get to sit down. They're busy, they are busy, but they're also perhaps the most vulnerable given the type of stuff that they work with on a day-to-day basis. So it can be hard when you start doing targeted training to get those groups to sit down and engage properly.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Just very quickly on a sidebar, I want to thank Simon for sending through the suggestion. Sorry, Aman for sending through Heat Miser. I'm going to have a look at Heat Miser for my radio. So I'm always interested in getting hints on this. Look, really interesting, Craig. Oh, by the way, there was one other question that occurred to me for you before bringing the rest of the panel, which I'm interested in, because we talk about security awareness and security training and so on. I'm just intensely aware, as CISO of a big company, you've got lots of other stuff to look at. You've got stats coming in from your sort of threat analysis. You've got research, coming in at you about new threats. You've got your team to run as well. If you could sort of put a percentage on it, how much percentage can you give to security awareness training and behavior change and so on?
To be honest, we try and fuse it in with other things. So one of the things that we look at those people who fail our simulations. We look at people who haven't done their compulsory training. Let's not get into why someone wouldn't do their compulsory training, but someone who hasn't. We look at the incidents that people have. So, did they follow a phishing link? Has malware been found in their system? Things like that. And we fuse that all together because you start to build a bit of sort of pattern analysis of, is it the people who aren't being trained who are more susceptible? Is it people that are being trained that's more susceptible? So it's actually that data curated together is more interesting than the individual parts themselves. So understanding, what does it mean? What does it mean that my users aren't doing their training? What does it mean that my users are suffering these types of incidents? And putting that together to build that almost pattern of life of our users to allow us to try and tackle the cultural things. So I think with training, and for this month we've launched. I don't know if you ever read them, Jeff, but do you remember the books where it's like a Dungeons and Dragons type book, and you get presented with an option, and it's if you choose to go left, go to page 50.
Turn to page, yes. Choose your own adventure. I loved them.
Exactly. So we built a small game with that sort of narrative in it. It's a cybersecurity based game, and you can take the protagonist either way, and it influences the ending as well. Right. Obviously, you can have to restart if you make a really catastrophic decision. So we've taken that as an approach to try and create a bit more of a conversation around security. I don't think you have to do the traditional training, as in explain to people, don't click links, don't do this, don't do that.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people understand that now. I think a lot of, certainly in our business, I think a lot of our users know not to follow links. It still happens. So I think there's something else that we've got to do. And I think it is that sort of that cultural thing. So again, going back to those sort of stats, building up that wider picture of what do those stats actually mean is really important to help us understand, first of all, what is our culture with regards to cybersecurity? And then secondly, how do we try and adjust that culture? Because changing culture is hard. Not just in Anglo-American, it's a hard thing to do. If you don't understand what the culture is towards cyber in the first place, I think it's almost impossible to change it. So bringing that data together, and that's the hard thing. How do you take all those disparate data sets of attacks, infections, training, penetration, susceptibility, reporting rates, all those things, fuse them together into something that tells that narrative about, as a business, this is what we're like in terms of cultural way of operating. So it's very important to me, but it's very important when fused with lots of other data
Yeah.
Give me an understanding as to what's going on. My awareness team, they want to see the raw data of training because they're set objectives with to achieve certain penetration of training, as an example.
Yeah.
For me, I want to see that all put together just to help me build that analysis of what the business is in effect.
Yeah, but that's really interesting. So, from the sounds of it, I mean, you're doing exactly research which is in the area that we want to get into, which is the extent to which the awareness that you do translates into changes of behavior, translates into fewer threats and problems. As I understand it, that is what you're looking at, and that is the sort of research you're carrying out. So I'm interested to what you found. Is
So we found a few things. I mean, one of them is so we have identified correlation between people who ignore training and their susceptibility. So there is a distinct correlation. It's almost people that believe they know better, and then that translates across to how they actually behave. So they're
that could be me.
Very, high level. They're sort of, I don't want to say nonchalant, but a little bit more risk accepting of things. Yeah. So they'll click that link even if they recognize that looks a bit dodgy. They're a bit more willing to accept the risk, whereas other users are a bit less willing. We've also, I mean, there's a few other behavioral traits that we've identified from doing this research, and we're nowhere near where we want to be in terms of how we analyze this data. So we're just starting on this journey. But it does give us a lot more context. For example, the sort of cultural acceptance of IT equipment. To give you, I suppose, an example, in the UK, Jeff, I've got to imagine that you've probably got a few laptops kicking about your house, or if not, you've got a laptop and maybe a tablet. You'll have multiple electronic devices. You go to some countries where we operate, and the laptop we issue that's the only laptop that exists in the house, and so therefore we treat it a bit like I treat a company car. I get company car allowance. My wife uses a company car. Is that appropriate? Isn't it? Well, if you look at the way she keeps it inside, probably not. She's not wickedly good at keeping it clean. Have we lost Jeff?
Hello.
Jeff.
I'm back. Sorry, Craig. Sorry to Craig and sorry to our audience there. My internet connection is clearly patchy today, and I'm really sorry about that. I will keep trying to pin it down if I can. But Craig, I thought that was really interesting. I got the gist in the beginning of what you're saying, and it's super relevant because this is exactly the territory that we want to get into with the rest of our panelists. Apologies about that. I also wanted to quickly paste into the chat my favourite Choose Your Own Adventure guide, which because I love those, but I absolutely love those books. I particularly love this one, which was the Mountain Survival Guide. If you've not seen that one, it's great, and you have to go into the forest and you're in a plane crash. And anyway, I really love those books, so it's a great reference. And I super interesting. Lastly, quickly, I know we've got the other guests waiting, but Craig, did that work? The Choose Your Own Adventure, did people like that?
Yeah, so we deliberately didn't put any intentional teaching in it. So this sort of between the line messages that we deliberately stayed away from don't click links type thing. And they really did like it. So we had actors come in. I think the fact that it was so much effort put in. So we had a professional company come in to record it. They had actors that we'd done casting. I've never done casting before, Jeff. It was brilliant. So I think there was a big fanfare around the company about it. And I think because it sort of went away from that traditional sort of click multiple choice type compliance-based training, our users really loved the fact that we were putting so much effort into it. It created a lot of conversation, and that's what we wanted. We didn't want people to necessarily learn new things from this game. We wanted to create conversation, get them talking about even just the game itself, and it has achieved that. There's a lot of talk around the sort of coffee areas about the game, and that's great. If I can make cyber a conversation point, then I'm in a really good place because we sort of normalize the idea that cybersecurity is a thing. We get people talking about it, and the more people share, the more people realize that it's not just them that's being targeted. They're not the only one. There's lots of people, so it's a really healthy thing to sort of breed effectively.
Good stuff. And apologies, I've kept our other guests waiting, partly because my internet connection keeps crapping out. And by the way, Daniela, you will get to ask your question about whether older people, the baby boomers, etc., have online banking, etc., possibly to our next guests, including the guy whose company is behind the survey. So we're going to welcome Stephen Fennell, Professor of Cybersecurity at University of Nottingham, Gema Perez Cortez, who's Information Security Awareness Lead at Canon EMEA, and Oz Alashe, who's CEO of CyberSafe. Welcome to all of you. Oz, we've probably butchered the results of your report there. Do you want to, any bits we missed out that you thought were important?
I don't know where to start. Heating, choose your own adventure guides, and then a little bit of cybersecurity thrown in as well.
Cover it all. Cover it all here on TISE.
But no, actually, I'm not butchered at all. Some great questions. The reality is this survey, it's an attitudes and behaviours survey, and really the aim is for us to be able to have conversations backed by real data about real people. And there are some really great questions that are being asked there, such as, yes, there might be a difference between a generational difference in fact, but of course the context isn't exactly the same. So the reality is, unsurprisingly, the younger people that we conducted or spoke to as part of the research, they had more devices that were connected, they had more accounts that were connected, they had more sets of credentials that could have been harvested in the first place. So there are other things that need to be taken into account, and then this is one of the reasons why it's really important we actually look at the data but use it to ask further questions.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, and that's it's sort of those kind of, it's like those surveys that are per head of population. You need to sort of screen out for, how many often you've had your identity stolen per number of accounts you have, and that's quite a difficult question, I think, to ask people to kind of.
It's definitely a difficult question. It's also, a difficult thing to kind of balance for. But it depends on what you're trying to ask, what you're trying to answer. So, in this particular case, what we really wanted to help people just to remind ourselves is there is no one size fits all. So sometimes we think that actually people behave like this because of that. Assumption. And the reality is that actually you've got to get under the skin of some of the data. Having the data in the first place is helpful, but actually you then need to get under the skin of it. And assumptions are of course dangerous. We know that, but they are start points for questions, and that's the key.
Good stuff. Thanks for that, Oz. Gema, can I come to you? Firstly, when we spoke yesterday in preparation for this, you were at home and you had, you had 5 pets. I'm not sure they're 5 dogs or cats. How?
It's 2 dogs and 3 cats. I hope they're behaving well today.
2 dogs, 3 cats. Whoa, was that problematic in terms of harmony or?
No, it's perfect. It's a big family. It was more difficult moving to the Netherlands actually a few years ago rather than living here altogether. They're fine. They're small as well.
Okay.
It's okay. Nice environment here.
Fair enough. Well, listen, let's get into the topic in hand, Gema. Can I stay with you? Because at Canon, it's interesting. Have you done the similar sort of stuff to what Craig's tried at Anglo American in terms of putting together, okay, here's the awareness training, here's what happened next, and so on? What's your sort of...
Yes, actually, we are trying to do that with the general training that we have in the organization. So the one you have to take every year, or when you're a new joiner. What we did, instead of having just a few topics that you have to cover, it's kind of a story of a person, so you feel related to the person. Going to the office, and then you find an USB, and then what do you do with that USB? And you can choose options. We're giving also the reason why, yes or no because of this. And we also have this thing that Craig mentioned about choosing what you want to do. With the phishing email, for instance, you have the phishing email and you can do whatever you want. If you click on the email, we say, are you sure you want to click? If they still want to click, they're going to go to the landing page and they're going to see the clues that say, yeah, it's a phishing email because of this and because of that. But we let them take the opportunity to make a mistake still. And I think we haven't launched it yet, but I think it's going to be it's going to have good results.
Yeah. And going again to that point Oz has raised about the different sort of generations of people, different types of people, to what extent in somewhere like Canon can you tailor your security awareness and security training to different sort of groups as and when they need it, or is that quite tricky because you're trying to get the same messages out to them?
I would say it's always tricky. Of course, it's easier in a smaller company, but indeed, I work for EMEA, so we have not only different age ranges, but we also have different cultures, different languages. You can imagine that the whole range of different people we have in the company, also with different backgrounds and. Whatever you can imagine of. The thing is, you have to. Ideally, we would create many different groups. We would do a very wide empathy map to understand not only the risk of each group, but also what messages works better with this group what format works better. Probably if it's a person that is working at a client, we're not going to use posters for them because they're not going to be at the office. So it's as simple as that. But many times we don't really think about that, and we just share articles for everyone, and they don't succeed. Sorry. The thing is, we cannot make as many groups as we would like. So in my case, we just think of risks and groups that are at risk. Like it can be procurement, finance, of course, the executive group, IT people, which normally we forget about them because we think they're IT people. So they understand risks better, and most of the times it's the opposite. They actually have more permissions than general users, and they are not necessarily as aware as a general user of security risks. So you have to go by risks, decide your groups, and then think about your message, the format, and even the timing of the campaigns we're sharing. I'm not sure if we lost Jeff
I think we may have.
for a second.
It's frozen in a pensive mode.
It wasn't so deep, my comment to yeah, not sure if here it is.
Oh, hang on. That might be better. There we go. Oh, God alive. Right, I'm on 4G now, so we'll see how that works out. I'm so sorry. This internet connection is very, very dodgy today. Apologies about that. Interesting. I wanted to move on to this topic in hand of how you change your training in relation to what the attackers are doing. But before I do that, Stephen, I just want to come to you on this and talk about this issue of the extent to which awareness translates into behaviour. I mean, going off the back of Oz's research, what's the sort of academic background to this, and what advice do you have for companies in terms of them trying to implement this?
Well, I think one thing we need to recognise is that companies are entering the fray at varying different levels of engagement with it to begin with. I mean, if we look at something like the cybersecurity breaches survey results here in the UK and look at the responses around the proportion of organisations that say they're doing any sort of, well, they call it cybersecurity training and awareness in that context, it's only about, well, it's less than a fifth of organisations say that they've done something for their staff in the past year. And so if we think about it in that context, there's very likely to be a situation where it's not having a chance of affecting behaviour because you're not even getting it onto the agenda for people. And then you need to think about, okay, if you're doing something that you've sort of ticked the box in a survey and said, yes, we do some sort of awareness training, what actually is it? And to what degree is it likely to be doing something other than telling somebody about something? If it's going to have any chance of influencing behavior, then you want to have it more contextualized, more explained to people. So it's not just telling them this thing exists, it's telling them what you're expected to do about it, how you're expected to deal with it. And so I suppose thinking about the difference between, sort of broadly speaking, how we might characterize awareness versus training versus education. Awareness is telling somebody what something is. Training arguably is telling somebody how to deal with something. And education is explaining to them perhaps why they need to think about it. And the further you go into explaining that message, the more chance you've got of winning hearts and minds and then being in a position where you might start to be able to influence behavior. But even then, it's not guaranteed that you're going to be able to do so. And so, I mean, it's several levels, and going through each level requires an additional degree of effort, which is quite a challenge, perhaps for an organisation that maybe hasn't even reached rung one on the ladder.
Yeah, it's interesting. Stephen, can I stay with you on this? Because I'm interested in this idea of how we learn, how we change our behaviours, and we learn through doing generally. That's a good way of concretizing our learning. If you learn a new word, you use it 5 times, you know it. But it's interesting because in security, the behavior we're often trying to get people to do is not to do something. So how do you get somebody to learn a behavior not to do something? Do you see what I mean? Have I got that right? I misunderstood the issue.
So again, I mean, it's having sort of at least evidence of some element of what you're trying to guard them against. I mean, with phishing, for example, I mean, it's the one where organizations have the opportunity to give people that experiential learning thing by putting them in contact with the thing they don't want them to click or don't want them to follow. But that has the risk of overexposing people to something in a particular way. And so you run the risk there of, okay, somebody is now recognizing the phishing message and they're recognizing the guise in which something is appearing. But what you actually want them to recognize is the thing they're trying to protect. So it's not recognize the phishing message that's the objective. It's recognize that you're trying to protect, for example, the data, the credentials, whatever it is the phishing message is trying to fish for. And again, you've got situations where the same trick can appear in different guises. So it could be a phishing message. It could be somebody phoning up and social engineering you via a phone call. It's the same objective. But if you've overfitted the training to get somebody to understand it in the context of here's what phishing messages look like, they may not realize the same thing in a different situation.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was going to come to you on that. This idea of having to make your training quite general so that people can apply it as the threat evolves versus it getting so general that it's not so much use anymore. How do you deal with that tension?
Yeah, so I guess maybe I should say up front that I think sometimes as a community we place too much emphasis on training people and educating people. You know, the reality is we're talking about a series of behaviors, not one behavior. Even most of our organizations' phishing simulations, and we are thinking about two behaviors: do people click and do people report? But the fact of the matter is there are many, many, many more behaviors that if you're serious about reducing phishing in your organization, you would address. You would look at people's digital footprints and whether or not they were aware of their digital footprints and reducing the chance of being phished in the first place. You would look at whether they are verifying, and when they're not sure of something, are they checking? Do they feel able to? Are they inclined to ask somebody something? We would check to see whether or not they are following the guidance that has been provided about how they go about reporting things. And of course, we would obviously make sure that they know how to report, and we'd make sure maybe they know how to identify. There's so many things that you could consider doing. And of course, training is a behavior in itself, completing your training. That actually, if you break it down, you now got options, and we don't take those options as a community. We focus on the things that are relatively easy. If I give you some information, you will behave better. I know I shouldn't eat as many packets of crisps as I'm going to eat this week. You could train me about it. You could test me about it. I'd probably get the answer right, and then I'd do it anyway. So it doesn't actually matter how much more training you give me. Now, that's not the case for every single user, but it is the case in some cases. And I think we can be more intelligent about how we address some of these risks.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a question here from James, which is quite a good one. And I think, really cuts the heart of this, really. Does the fact that it's training at work add to the friction, as in your workplace, telling people what to do? There's clearly an appetite for stories about threats. The Tinder swindler didn't have to be broken into 90-second episodes to get a lot of people super interested in it. And that's interesting. I wonder, I was thinking as Oz was talking, lessons we can learn from health messaging, to Oz's point, how do you get somebody to eat less crisps? And if you look at the health industry and what they do, and, educating you about what this does to your arteries and to your and there were pictures of children who've lost their get to people the issues. I just wonder whether we can learn from other communities in terms of that kind of messaging, getting it through to people to change that behavior. Him, I don't know whether that's something that you've sort of thought about. Oh.
Yes, there is actually a very good example. A former colleague of mine was always sharing, and I think it's again related to how you share the message according to the audience you have. It's the same as we had here when in Spain a long time ago. They were really trying because there were many car accidents a year. So they were really trying to find a way to tell people, hey, be careful, because you can die. There was a huge campaign, huge television campaign. It was very aggressive and very well known because you could see people just dying in a car accident. It was super hard. Still, people kept running, going at over the limit, speed limit, and drinking before driving, and not using seat belts. So it was shocking. Then they did an analysis and they realized that the audience didn't take that as something, as a behavior changer. So what they had to do is actually having more radars in the dangerous roads, and then people actually slowed down because money was important for them, but a video after you see it 3 times is not as impacting anymore. So it was for me, it's a great example how you make a whole society change their behavior, just finding the incentive. For some cultures, I've seen it with clients. I've seen it with clients that they have had very big gamification campaigns in which they could play and you could answer questions and you could get a prize. They were expensive. They did it with the help of a vendor, and still people were clicking on the emails, and they realized that then what worked there was the negative culture, which I would never recommend, but that's what worked there. If you click on the link, you have to go to a training, and if you click on the link 5 times, I'm going to tell your boss, which is I would prefer. I would rather go for a change in the whole culture of the company, little by little, year by year, addressing risks, bigger risks in a more detailed way. But yeah, it would work with them, and it's just an example of how much you have to tailor your message to the audience.
The audiences. I think one of the things that and I'd be interested to know what Craig sees in Anglo American here. There's the kind of time that we take to give people information and hope that they do with stuff, and then this is actually this idea of helping people. So one is training people, telling people things, and the other one is actually helping them. The example we often use here at CyberSafe is this idea of nudges and prompts. So we once got thanked by somebody, don't mind admitting how we developed it. Thank you very much for training me about default passwords on Wi-Fi routers, and they pointed out that they were at work reading this and their Wi-Fi router was at home. This was the pandemic, and the point was it's not very helpful. It's the right information at the wrong time. I guess as a security leader, getting around that feels like a challenge that many organizations have, and nudges and prompts sometimes make a real difference. Using digital devices, my watch tells me to stand up if I've been sat down for too long. That's a nudge, it's a prompt. Craig, is that something that you've kind of seen as effectively applied within the organization?
So in terms of it being effective in our organisation, I don't know. We've looked. So this week we had a conversation about. So we have a SOAR, Security Orchestrating Automation Response capability. So we have lots of data going in, and so we know when someone tries to plug in a USB device, it gets blocked, but it creates an alert when someone clicks a malicious link or accesses an IP that's on a list, or anything that could be considered risky behaviour. And what we want to do, and we're obviously looking at the marketplace just now for this bit, is to give people little pockets of information when they do. So you plug a USB in, instead of the pop-up, the Windows balloon that pops up and says your organization has blocked USB ports, please contact system administrator, actually pop up, a resource that talks about why we've done that, rather than telling them we've done it and how to get access. We want to actually, if they want to click on it and go into it and get a bit of training at that point in time that informs them why the organization's done that. Some examples perhaps of where maybe we've had issues with USBs in the past, or just notable breaches, stuff like USBs being involved. So giving them that on-time training, it's almost like on-demand training, but very pertinent to that point in time. I agree, it's the way to go, Oz, and it's the way we want to go. So we have all the data to support when people are doing risky things. We just haven't gone to the next stage, which is what we're looking at now, which is to deploy something that drops those little nuggets of information when someone does something.
That's really interesting, Craig, and because you'd have to almost. It sounds like that would be sort of Windows intervention. Only Microsoft would be the person you would go to implement that, because they're the people who would.
No, we've got, obviously I won't talk about the companies we're speaking to, but we've got a company in mind who we think can help us in this. Okay. We needed the SOAR to help us be in that position. So the SOAR is being deployed now. So we're now in that position where, because it's automation, this is the thing. We've got 100,000 users. There's a lot of risky things that happen on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. The SOC team couldn't sort of interject something manually, so it's got to be completely automated, where real fires, response from the SOAR is do this through this tool. But I think it's the right way. My experience with users, we do roadshows, so we've done a couple of things this year. We launched a family guide, which had nothing to do with the business. It was done by us, but it was purely how to keep your parents safe, your grandparents safe, your kids safe, and yourself safe at home.
Yeah.
We've created a travel guide as well, which is the same, but focusing on, traveling, if you go to China, don't have an encrypted laptop, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So we've done that to try and create the conversation and take it away from business and just talking about sort of how to be safe in yourself. And we do workshops and roadshows, and the engagement at the roadshows is absolutely fantastic. And people have got so many questions, and you think, these are all in the compliance training, but then you remember most people just furiously click through compliance training. So I think if the information is presented at the right time and in a very, very interesting way, so it's got to be attractive, I think a lot of users have an interest, so they probably will engage with it. That's what we're sort of banking on with this next endeavor. They will engage with it, and they'll possibly want to learn more. So I think the next thing beyond that is having almost a library of resources, of curated news articles, documents, where if somebody says, actually, I'm really interested in how passwords get compromised, so off I go to a resource and I can pull all this information about it. Because users are quite interested. It's just they're worried to come to security because they see security as the sort of the gatekeepers, and will just get angry if you don't know how passwords are cracked.
I think that's the thing. I think that's really interesting, Craig. If there was an intervention popped up that said you've just plugged in a USB stick, we've blocked it because, by the way, the last time we let somebody plug in a USB stick, here's what happened. It didn't work out very well. You would get it. You'd be, oh, okay, I understand the reason. But I just want to, in the closing few minutes, and apologies, we've had technical issues. I've had technical issues. The internet does not always run smoothly. But Hema, I wondered if I could ask you about this in terms of this idea of changing your messaging to keep up with the attackers and changing your security training and awareness and culture and so on. How do you do that? Because, if something happens in the news, do you have to sort of flip and respond quickly? Can you do that? Because your materials are all there. How do you square that circle?
Well, I have some examples of that that I've actually experienced. Well, many information security awareness leads. I have a program, a yearly program, but then you always have to tailor messages and change and prioritize and modify things last minute. I have one example when the IKEA attack happened last year. This reply chain attack, in which you have an email that may be external, but then you see the whole conversation and the thread is written by people in your organization, or supposedly written by people in your organization. And that's something that happened, and we saw it happening in more places. So we just had to create some information about that, communicate as Oz mentioned, giving information, why is it happening, how can you detect that it's fake, and what you have to do. But also we have to be very careful with this, because, for instance, if you remember the MFA fatigue attack that happened, it's happening a lot very recently. The problem with that is that we are still training employees on using MFA for their personal accounts as well, and for other accounts that we don't have control over. So we're telling them you have to use MFA, but now we have to tell them use MFA, but don't use the deny approve option. So the message is getting more complicated, with the bases are not there yet. So of course, you had to have the basis of information that you have to always be sharing with employees, and you have to make them understand. But there are always going to be small things that you have to add to your program, and you have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, interesting. I'm aware we're butting up against time, and I feel particularly bad about that, because obviously we have had gremlins in the system, and I'm aware I've been tuning in and out. I've not been here making a cup of tea or anything. I have been struggling to get back online, but my phone remarkably held up. The 4G is going well, so apologies for that, and apologies for running out of time. However, the conversation can continue and should continue online. All the guests' LinkedIn profiles are in the chat, so please do connect. And Craig, interested in that idea you had of interventions popping up. If you get a chance to share that at any stage, we'd love to have you back on that. But I want to thank all of our guests: Craig McEwen, CISO Anglo-American; Stephen Fennell, Prof of Cybersecurity, University of Nottingham; Hema Perez-Cortez, InfoSec Awareness Lead at Canon, EMEA; and Oz Alashay, CEO of CyberSafe. Thank you to all of you. A panel so good you can moderate yourselves, and I really appreciate you doing that. I also want to thank our Thijs Hunter, who sits behind the scenes and today has been stitching bits of the internet together with string and so on. Thank you to you, and also the team at Thijs. Next week, Tuesday, 4 p.m. My co-host Jenny is talking about Tom Langford. Who's CISO, Security Executive and Advisor, and is our stand-in occasional teissTalk host, is brilliant. Is going to be doing a session on, is your hybrid security awareness program helping or harming your organizations? Ties into this, sort of leads on from this. That's Tuesday at 4. So do time in for that. Thanks, Craig. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Oz. Thanks, Hema. Look forward to seeing you again soon. And thanks to all of you at home. Cheerio. Bye.
Thanks, Jeff.